Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. We continue to discuss and learn about the great women of India. I suppose you all remember that we were discussing about some of the women in the Ramayana last week. We saw Sumitra and we also saw Shabari. Compared to Sumitra, Shabari is a small or a minor character, we think. There are other minor characters in the same Ramayana. Let us have a look at a few of them. One such minor character is Anusooya Devi. Anusooya was the Dharmapatni or the wife of sage Atri, and she's called Atri Anusooya. Atri was living in the forest as is usual for any sage, and in his hermitage was Anusooya too. Both Atri and Anusooya were living a life of austerity and penance. You can imagine as to how life would be in the forest. Not much of comfort as we think what comfort should be today. No big concrete buildings, no posh facilities, and nothing of the kind that we think that give comfort and facility to a human being. That was a forest, natural. There could be rains suddenly, there could be floods suddenly, the wild animals could suddenly come out from somewhere, and still they were living peacefully. And it was to this hermitage did Rama, Sita, and Lakshmana come when they were in their Vanavas. Right at the beginning of the Vanavas, we find Rama along with Sita and Lakshmana visiting the hermitage of Atri and Anusooya. And we can imagine what would have happened. Sage Atri and Rama were in conversation, and in the inner parts of the hermitage, Anusooya and Sita were in conversation. In fact, Anusooya spoke to Sita in such terms that she prepared Sita in a way to the life in the forest. Anusooya was very, very acclimatized to that kind of a life. And here was Sita, who was just coming into the forest, all this while having been a princess in her father's palace, and subsequently, after marriage, a princess in King Dasharatha's palace. And this is the first time that Sita comes into the forest. So Anusooya was trying to give some information to Sita, some kind of an advice as to how life in the forest would be. However, just before this conversation started, we find a small bit of information, rather a kind of introduction to Anusooya given by Atri himself. Visualize the situation. The hermitage, Rama and Sita come to the hermitage. Sage Atri welcomes them and then introduces Anasuya Devi, also tells as to what she is. You know what the sage told them? Here is Anasuya. Anasuya, the compassionate. And to show how compassionate she was, the sage narrated an incident that had happened earlier. Some parts of the forest, not the dense forest, but then some parts where there were small villages, had gone into famine because of no rains for many years. And those people came to the hermitage and requested help. And what did Anasuya do? Not only did she help them, she also did something else. She went to their villages and by all her penance, the benefits of all the penance that she had performed, she gave all that benefit, all that punya, and requested the gods to give the fields of the villages some fertility, because of which, because of her punya, in those areas where there was no rain for 7 or 8 years, suddenly the trees started giving fruits. Suddenly the roots and the tubers came up. And suddenly they could find a new river. The new river was none else than Ganga herself. And how did all this happen? It was all because Anasuya Devi gave all her punya. And for what sake? For the sake of the welfare of those people. We can think as to how compassionate she would have been. Not only compassionate, but also altruistic, in the sense that she was prepared to give all that punya she had to others. Would any of us imagine that? We do a good deed, and if there is a benefit from that deed, what do we say? This is mine. We claim the benefit for ourselves. But here was a lady, a simple dharmapatni of a sage, who was prepared to give all the benefits, all the credits of all the austerity and penance that she had to the simple women, to the simple men, and the simple village folk for their benefit. The very name Anasuya is a wonderful name. Anasuya. Asuya is jealousy. Asuya is becoming obtrusive to someone else's goodness and fame. And here was Anasuya. She never felt bad about others. She never felt jealous towards others. She never had any asuya. That is why she is called Anasuya. And how thoughtful of Anasuya to have done something wonderful. In fact, we can even say that it was because of Anasuya, because of her thoughtfulness, that Rama was able to get Sita back. And why do we say so? We all know the Ramayana story. If we trace a few areas, a few instances, we can remember that as Ravana carried Sita away, as the Pushpaka Vimana was flying in the skies, Sita was screaming for help. And when the Pushpaka Vimana passed over some mountains, some hills, where from that height Sita was able to see some dots, and those dots she was able to perceive from that distance were some monkeys over the hilltops. And what did she do? Thinking that someone would save her, someone would be able to trace as to where she is being taken away, she just removed a few of her ornaments and threw them down. And later on, when Rama and Lakshmana come in search of Sita, they happen to meet with Sugriva, Anjaneya, and the other monkeys, the Vanara strongmen. At which point, Sugriva would bring a few ornaments and place those ornaments in front of Rama. And what would he tell Rama? Rama, some time ago, we saw the 10-headed Rakshasa flying in his Pushpaka Vimana. And there was a woman crying, screaming, because the Pushpaka Vimana was going so high up, we could not see as to who that woman was. But we knew very well that she was screaming. And suddenly we found some ornaments fall down. We have just picked up all those ornaments and here they are. And you remember? Rama looked at all of them and cried because he recognized them to be Sita's, recognized them to be what Sita was wearing. And when Rama asked Lakshmana if he recognized any of them, Lakshmana said he could only recognize the anklet because he only would look at Sita's feet and not her face. Now, where did these ornaments come from? When Sita left Ayodhya for the forest, she had left everything there. She just came in a dress of bark. It was customary for anyone going to the forest to get draped only in a dress of bark, dress made out of the bark of the stems of the trees. So obviously, Sita did not wear all her jewelry. And where did these ornaments come from? It was Anusooya who gave Sita these ornaments. Anusooya wanted to give Sita something. So she asked Sita if she would need anything. And Sita, being that lovely damsel she was, she said, I would not want anything. I have everything. I'm peaceful, content. I don't want anything. And Anusooya thought for a while, and something told her she probably knew from her penance. She decided to give Sita a lovely fragrant garland and some ornaments. She told Sita to wear the garland whenever Rama was there with her and wear the ornaments too. And that is how Sita came to have some of those ornaments which became very handy and useful when she threw them towards the monkeys. That gave an idea as to Ravana was carrying Sita away, and that gave some direction of hope for Rama to find as to where Sita would have been abducted away. That was Anasuya's thoughtfulness. So in Anasuya, we find a strong woman, a woman of simplicity, compassion, and austerity. In the same Ramayana, we also come across yet another minor character by name Swayam Prabha. Now, many people who know the Ramayana might not even remember this lady by name Swayam Prabha. Where was she and what was she doing? We all know Anjaneya, along with some other Vanara strongmen, went in search of Sita in the southern direction. So as they all traveled from Kishkinda towards south, they went to different places trying to search for Sita, trying to find out if Sita was anywhere. Suddenly, all the monkeys found themselves, that group of monkeys, they found themselves in a beautiful place. It appeared like a lovely town. And it was made of gold, shining, gleaming, with beautiful parks, very beautiful fountains, lots of trees around, but then all those trees were made of gold. So these Vanaras were all stumbled, perplexed. They didn't know where they were going. And all that dazzling gold. So they just roamed about here, there, everywhere, and they lost way. Lost way because they did not know. Everywhere it was gold, so they did not know which side or which direction to go. And suddenly Anjaneya found one beautiful woman there, sitting all by herself, performing some tapas. And as she opened her eyes, she found the Vanaras. She questioned them, "Who are you? Into this place where even Devas dread to come, you have come. And who are you people?" To which Anjaneya gave the reply. As Swayam Prabha and Anjaneya conversed, they were able to find out that Anjaneya on one hand was in search of Sita, and Swayam Prabha on the other hand was keeping guard to that city of gold, or the Hemakuta city. It was called the city of Hemakutam. Hema or Haima being gold. Anjaneya asked Swayam Prabha as to what her story was. It was a very short story, but then quite a sad one. Swayam Prabha had a friend by name Hema. The particular city in which she was sitting was built by Maya. You all know who Maya is. Maya is the divine architect or the Vishwakarma. Maya had built that city, and without letting Indra know, because Maya was in the Indraloka, but without letting the king know, Maya came down to that city with the lady whom he loved and for whose sake he had built that city? You can guess, because the city was a city of gold. You can guess as to why Maya would have built it. He had built it for Hema. So he brought Hema and lived there. After some time, Indra found out that Maya was there, and Indra himself came down and took Maya and Hema back to the Indraloka. And while both of them were going back to the Indraloka, and on the command of Indra also, Swayam Prabha was asked to keep guard to that city. She could enjoy whatever she wants in that city, because everything was there. There was so much of pomp and splendor, so much of prosperity, so much of wealth. She could have used all that. But there she was, not touching any single point of that prosperity. She was sitting there and performing tapas. She was performing continuous penance. And when Anjaneya realized that she was there, he requested as to what was the way out for those Vanaras to get out of that place, because they were all caught there. They did not know how to go out. There was only one way out, which Swayam Prabha knew. Swayam Prabha told them, don't worry. The only way to get out of this city, once you have come into this, the only way to get out is by the use of penance. No other thing can take you out. And the Vanaras pleaded, we have no penance with us. We've just been roaming and coming. And Swayam Prabha said, do not worry. Let me use my punya, let me use my austerity to take all of you out, and I'll come back and continue my tapasya. Here is another lady who used all her tapasya for the sake of others. Friends, very many times we think we do good deeds, we do help to others. When we help them, we don't help them because we find it to be our duty, but then we think we do some kind of charity by helping them. And even there, we give something to someone else only when we think that object is not useful to us. If I have 2 pens, I give 1 pen away because I have 1 for myself. But then Swayam Prabha was not of that kind. She did not retain anything for herself, whatever she had. She had not even touched anything in that city. There are 2 sides to Swayam Prabha. On the first, she was the guardian angel of that city, and she could have used all the wealth there. She did not. She did not bother to touch that wealth which she thought belonged to someone else, and she only did tapasya. And on the second side, even that tapasya she was prepared to give to others. She wanted to help the Vanaras in their good cause and made all of them get out of that city by her penance. And what does the name Swayam Prabha mean? You all can guess that. She had glory, light. Prabha, she had that light, that glorious light. And where did that light come from? Not from elsewhere. We all cannot have light from ourselves. If at all we have light, we reflect from elsewhere. But then she was Swayam Prabha. It was her own light. It was her own glory. Swayam Prabha is yet another minor character of the Ramayana. We have any number of such wonderful, strong women in our Puranas, epics, and Shastras. If we try to look at the other women characters of the Ramayana, I'm reminded of Trijada here. Trijada was a Rakshasi. Friends, I've told you already that there are any number of Ramayanic versions in our country. We have Ramayana in every language of our land. Probably not one, but many in each language. In most of the Ramayanas, we find Trijada to be an old and compassionate Rakshasi. Sita was in the Ashokavana, and surrounding Sita were a lot of Rakshasis, and one among them was Trijata. She was called Trijata, obviously because she had 3 plaits. Her hair was plaited and she had 3 plaits, and that's why she was called Trijata. And this old Rakshasi was sitting there. Unlike the rest of them, she was a very compassionate Rakshasi. When the rest of the Rakshasis were all threatening Sita, it was Trijata who coaxed Sita not to lose heart. She comforted Sita and in fact gave lots of vital information to Sita not to get deceived and deceived by the Mayajal of Ravan and Indrajit. At one point of time in the battle, Indrajit created a kind of a situation where he made some kind of an image of Rama and Lakshmana and made Sita believe that Rama and Lakshmana were dead. Looking at those images falling down, Sita thought Rama and Lakshmana were dead and started crying. It was Trijata who told Sita that it could not be Rama and Lakshmana and gave indications of good signs, good omen to Sita that no damage would come to her. In some other Ramayanic versions, we find Trijata to be a young girl, the daughter of Vibhishana. The small little girl who was asked to keep company to Sita. In one of the Ramayanas, there is a very beautiful situation or sequence, and it's a kind of a semi-conversation between Sita and Trijata. Let me tell you how that sequence goes. Sita is sitting, obviously sorrowful, and it was close to the night. And since it was the nightfall, the rest of the Rakshasis had started sleeping. Sita alone, sitting there, thinking, contemplating on all her difficulties. And next to her is this young Trijata. Sita looked at Trijata. It appeared as though Trijata was not completely asleep, So Sita slowly patted her and asked her, Trijata, are you sleeping? That is what most of us do, isn't it? When someone is sleeping besides, it could be the sister, the brother, or the friend, we just pat and say, are you sleeping? Especially when we don't get sleep and someone else is sleeping, we don't hesitate to ask them, wake them up, and then ask them, are you sleeping? Now, Sita was obviously not sleeping, could not get sleep, and here was Trijata sleeping. So she patted her and asked her, are you sleeping? Trijata said, yes, but I was also visualizing a dream. And Sita asked her, what was the dream? Trijata said, it was a wonderful dream. I could see, a beautiful lady with a lamp walking out of Ravana's house. And I could see the goddess of victory going towards Rama. That gave so much of faith and life to Sita. Did you really see that? Yes. What did you see? Tell me again. And Trijata said, on one side I found a lady with a lamp, which means Mahalakshmi walked out of Ravana's house. The goddess of prosperity walked out of Ravana's house. The goddess of victory walked out of Ravana's house. At the same time, I could see the goddess of victory go to Rama. And now, what would any of us do? We are a little more curious to know as to what happened in the dream further, isn't it? So now, Sita asked, what happened after that? What had happened? What is the next step? Trijata said, that is when you woke me up. I could not see the dream in complete. That is when you woke me up, Amma. And you know what Sita said? That means sleep more. You sleep further. ஆயிடை இன்னமும் துயில்க என்றாள். You sleep more so that you can see the full dream, and that dream will give me so much of life. Trijata was a dharmic companion to Sita, keeping Sita all the while lively and giving lots of faith and trust to that wonderful heroine of the Ramayana. Trijata was very thoughtful too. She was sitting next to Sita. She gave Sita all the trust and faith. Not only that, she also told Sita of some important information about Ravana. When Sita was sitting there, she was all the while scared. If only Ravana would take her away somewhere else. And at one point of time, Sita realized that the war had begun. And as the war was going on, Sita also had a doubt if Ravana would suddenly shift her out of that place, take her elsewhere and hide her. Ravana was capable of doing that. And we also know that Ravana was the king of all the 14 worlds, and he had command over every place. So Sita was genuinely worried. She would sit there and cry, if only this 10-headed monster would carry me, what would happen? He would hide me somewhere. It was only Trijata who gave that information to Sita, that Ravana would not do that. He cannot do that at this stage. If only he does, carry you from here elsewhere, he already has a curse that his herd will burst off. If the head would go away, would he dare do that? And that gave Sita some more faith and trust. Friends, it is not important that the information that Trijata gave Sita was big or small. But then it was vital information at the right point of time. That way, Trijata acted something like a psychological counselor. She sat with Sita, spoke nice words, and kept boosting her morale and courage. When someone is in a kind of a turmoil, the thinking faculties fade away. And that's what Sita was in. And Trijata was a wonderful counselor. When we find ourselves engulfed in some problem, we seek someone's advice and counsel. And here was Trijata, that kind of a counsel to Sita herself. Trijata might appear to be a small little girl, or in some other Ramayanas, a very old woman, a old Rakshasi. But whatever she was that wise counsel to Sita herself. Friends, we've seen all these minor women characters of the Ramayana. Though they appear for fleeting instances in the storyline of the epic, their contribution is great and positive. Of course, we have major characters like Sita and Mandodari. Sita was a wonderful woman. Sita, who withstood all the troubles and came out much higher than Rama himself. However, the base of the Ramayana is not only the major characters, but also the minor characters. And that is where we find these women like Anusooya, Swayam Prabha, and Trijata contribute so much positively, not only to the epic, but also to the ethos and the culture of this land. Sita was the dear daughter of King Janaka. She was called Vaidehi and she was called Maithili. We all know why she was called thus. King Janaka's kingdom was the Videha kingdom. Being the princess of the Videha kingdom, she became Vaidehi. And the capital city was Mithila. And being the daughter of Mithila, she became Maithili. Of course, she was also called Janaki, meaning she was the daughter of King Janaka. Sita was married to Sri Ramachandra, and we all know how that marriage was solemnized. But let's have a look at the situation that she was in after the marriage. She came happily to Ayodhya and lived so very happily in the palace at Ayodhya until the time Queen Kaikeyi would demand Rama's exile into the forest for a span of 14 years. Rama, having been commanded that way, came to Sita to inform her of the exile. Sita was unaware of what had happened in Kaikeyi's mansion. She was fondly awaiting the arrival of Ramachandra as a crown prince that afternoon. It so happened the coronation never took place and Rama arrived at Sita's palace. Sita looked at him and Rama narrated as to what had happened and told her that he was to go to the forest and she would live in the palace for the next 14 years. That is when we look at Sita not as that young, innocent looking bride, but then we look at Sita as that great woman who stood up for her liberty. When Rama told her that she would continue to live in the palace, she would immediately get annoyed. She would look at him and start giving a string of reasons as to why she should not remain there, but then accompany him. He would try to give all kinds of plausible answers. He would tell her that she would be a trouble in the forest, that she cannot withstand the forest, the heat of the forest, and also tell her that she would have to look after Dasharatha and the Rajamatas. Beyond the stage, Sita would not argue with him. She found it futile to give him answers. Whatever she said, he kept on giving some other reason. What would any of us do? We would only continue with our arguments. We would only say, no, this is this, I would come. But you know what Sita did? After a particular stage, she did not even give him any answers. And as he kept on talking, she went in, wore a dress of bark, came out and stood next to him. That was all. There was no word but action. She indirectly told him, let's not discuss any further. I have draped myself in the dress of bark, which means I'm ready to move to the forest. She was more a woman of action there than a person of words. She felt the action expressed more beautifully than words. And that is the Sita whom we meet in the Ramayana. We've just started for the Vanavas. Vanavas was for a period of 14 years. And to see the entire Sitayana story, can we not wait for another period of 7 days? We shall continue next week. Thank you.